Aside from breathing and bracing, the most important principle to learn is the lifter's wedge or the hip hinge. This is an actual movement that you're going to use in anything that's related to a squat, a deadlift, or anything in regular life where you're picking something up off the ground, you're washing your hands at the sink, or you're getting up off the couch or the toilet. This movement here of the hinge and the lifter's wedge applies to all of that and needs to be applied in your daily life. What the lifter's wedge means is you move about the hips instead of the back. That means you need to treat your femurs and your torso like they're one solid piece, like a door hinge. And the hinge, the piece that's moving, is your hips. So if you imagined your upper legs and your lumbar as two rigid pieces, the only place that should be moving is at the hips. I'll do a quick demonstration of what that should look like. So that's a correct hinge. The knees can bend, but the big key is you're not bending using the back. So this would be a demonstration of bending using the back. That is what we don't want to do. Another key to the lifter's wedge is what we call the anti-shrug. Everybody knows what a shrug is, but what you might not know is an anti-shrug, which just means the opposite of a shrug, and pushing your shoulder blades down. What pushing your shoulder blades down does is activates your lats and your upper back musculature to create more tension and rigidity for your spine. So a combination of the anti-shrug, and make sure you watch the breathing and bracing video, the combination of the anti-shrug, the breathing and bracing, pushing out 360 degrees, is what gives that spine the ultimate resiliency and strength to do these movements. The spine is incredibly strong and it's incredibly resilient to any sort of load or movement as long as you apply to the lifter's wedge and the breathing and bracing. 360 degrees around, an anti-shrug, and that will give the spine the most strength and resiliency and structure to lift anything. Now what usually happens when we hit a max squat or a max deadlift or a high rep set of any of those movements is we start to lose fatigue there. We start to get fatigued here. We start to get fatigued in our upper back. And that's when the spine starts to lose its resiliency. So understanding that duration and endurance are required in those helps you with your training, knowing how to apply sets, reps, lengths, durations of time to create some endurance in there and not just strength. So repeating something about the radio antenna or the cell phone tower analogy that hopefully you learned in the breathing and bracing video is, again, the spine is not strong, it's not resilient by itself. The vertebrae and disc structures are not strong and they're not resilient. To create strength and resiliency to those, you use your intra-abdominal pressure, your anti-shrug, and it creates a tremendous, tremendous structure. Now the purpose of the hip hinge is to maintain the rigidity and strength of that structure and only move at the hips. So the squat, the deadlift, the Romanian deadlift, the good morning, anything along those lines, any of those compound movements that resemble those lifts, we like to initiate those with the hip hinge or the lifter's wedge. So you will hear those two terms, the hip hinge or the lifter's wedge, in a lot of the technique videos. And again, it's so important to maintain this hip hinge in your everyday life. Anytime you bend over at the sink to brush your teeth, to wash your hands, to pick something up off the floor, you want to hinge at the hips and not bend at the spine. The final part of the hip hinge is coming back up. So descending, we've learned to use the hips as a hinge of a door, while the lower leg and upper body maintain two singular strong positions. And coming back up, we want to do the same thing. We don't want to initiate coming back up using the low back or the spine. We want to initiate coming back up by firing the glutes and bringing the hips through. So it should look something like this. Now this will be a demonstration of descending in the lifter's wedge properly, but using the low back to come up, which is incorrect. So just finishing this off and polishing this section off, I hope you can understand how to apply the lifter's wedge and tie that in with the breathing and bracing video to understand how incredibly strong and resilient your spine can be when you breathe and brace properly, you use the musculature of your back properly to create that rigidity and structure for your spine while learning to move correctly with the hips and not the back.